All right, we are continuing today with our series on the Ten Commandments. Our very first week, which was a couple of months ago, I shared with you a Hebrew word found in the Old Testament, hesed. Hesed is one of those words that's kind of hard to translate. We go into English with that word and we use loving kindness, we use steadfastness, sometimes it's translated as mercy in English, but it is a word that comes out of a covenant relationship that God has with His people. That He is going to be kind to them, He is going to be faithful to His people, He is going to protect and serve His people, and let's face it, not all of the time were His people all of that easy to serve, all of that likable, much less lovable. His people would murmur, they would grumble, they would complain, sometimes they would flat out disobey Him, but God never turns His back on His covenant to His people and His hesed, His everlasting love for His people. We talked about that because you cannot come into, or you should not come into the Ten Commandments without understanding that love relationship, that father-child love relationship, that covenant relationship God has with His people. Because if you don't understand that, then you're going to look at this list of rules and regulations, of oughts and ought-nots, of do's and don'ts, and you're going to see something very legal sounding, something very obligatory, instead of seeing that this is a Father God who has released His people from slavery just before this. He has delivered them from bondage. He has protected them. He has waged war on their behalf to save them from the Egyptian army that was in hot pursuit. He is a God who longs to bless His people, who has set them in freedom, and who now, as He delivers the law to them in the Ten Commandments and beyond, He wants them to remain in the freedom that He has bought for them, to remain in the blessing that He has for them. And so His commandments are intended to do that, to keep His people within that place of blessing and freedom that He has won for them. And that makes a huge difference in how you approach the commandments in the Old Testament, to understand that they come from the heart of love that is the heart of the God that we serve. So today we roll into the 8th commandment, which is blunt, which is simple: thou shalt not steal. You shall not steal. Exodus 20, verse 15. And I am not sure this morning that there is any of the Ten Commandments that is as tangibly relevant to our daily lives, as felt and experienced in our daily lives as this commandment not to steal. In fact, it is so much a part of our daily lives, it is like the air that we breathe for a fish, like the water that they swim in. It so surrounds them, they hardly even notice the environment. And I think that happens to us sometimes. We have to have built into our days so many protections against stealing that we hardly even think about it. We've become so accustomed to it. I mean, how many of y'all have an alarm on either your house or your car? Right? A lot of us do. How many of y'all have a well, okay, I'm not going to ask you how many of y'all have a lock on your house or car, because we all do. That's to protect us from getting stolen from. How many of you all use a debit card that you have to type a PIN number in when you use it or you get cash? That's another protection that we have. How many times a day do you have to stop and type in your username and your password to get on this account or that account, to protect your identity, to protect somebody from getting in and doing things with your stuff, your data, that they should not be doing? I mean, so often we just hardly even think about it. What about your favorite store? How many security cameras are watching you as you walk around Walmart or Neiman Marcus or Kroger or wherever, keeping an eye on you to make sure you're not stealing anything? And what about those dreaded plastic security tabs that they snap on the clothing at the store? You better make sure that the clerk takes that off, or you're going to get a rude awakening as you try to leave the store with one of those. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but it is pretty scary, all of the noise and the stuff that goes off when you walk out with one of those security tabs on. But basically, I'm just saying, it is so prevalent. Stealing is so prevalent, and we think about it so much, we don't even realize how much we think about it, because it is so built into our daily existence. I don't know about you, but I can remember several times. I've probably been stolen from more times than I can remember, but there are a few times that have marked me where I'm like, they made me so angry because it was something I cared about so much. And the first one of those, I was 16 years old, and all I did during the summertime was I worked and I played tennis and worked. And every day, if even when it was raining, my friends and I, we would get together and play tennis. Well, I remember one time I went out to the car that I was able to drive. It wasn't really my car, it was my parents' car, but the car that they let me drive. I walked out behind our house to the alley where that car was parked. I got into the car, and I noticed my tennis racket was gone. Oh, I was so angry. I did not have the money to just go buy a new tennis racket, so I had to use, instead of my graphite racket, I had to use my dad's aluminum racket. Thankfully, we didn't have a wooden racket that I had to use at that point. But that just made me so angry. Maybe one of the more annoying ones. First of all, if you've ever had your identity stolen, someone's off using a credit card with you, that's really annoying. I have lots of friends who that's happened to. But the closest thing to me that happened, it was pretty annoying, was one time Isla and I were visiting friends in Lubbock, Texas. And our car was parked in front of their home in nice little Lubbock, Texas. And in the morning, we slept there. In the morning, we went out to our car. Someone had broken out one of the windows. They had managed to find in the glove compartment one of our checkbooks. I think there were maybe 15 to 20 checks left in that particular checkbook. And over the next few years, this person, who I don't believe was ever caught, they managed to sign my name on every single one of those checks and use it. And if you have ever been through that before, I don't know how it works today, but back in that time, I had to go to the bank every time they used one of my checks and sign a forgery affidavit and fill it out. So I was going to the bank all of the time, and it was so frustrating. And then it was so kind of just yucky feeling knowing there was someone running around Texas signing my name and buying stuff off of my checkbook. And then there was another one that really marked me was we were in Rio doing mission work, and we lived there. And one time there was a father-daughter camp out it was really fun. We all took tents. We went near the beach, and we camped out with our daughters on the beach. And that morning we got out and we just hung out on the beach and had fun playing in the waves and all that stuff. And when it was time to go, we all went back to our cars, except my car wasn't there. And so I'm like, I know. Then I go to the next street, and then I go to the next street, and finally it's like, it got stolen. Has anybody ever had a car stolen here this morning? So we deal with this. I mean, it can be little stuff, it can be big stuff. We deal with having things stolen or with the urge to take something that's not ours all of the time. This is a definition on your outline this morning. You really don't need this. You know this probably already. But just the definition that we can use this morning of stealing. It is to take something which belongs to someone else without their permission. That is stealing. Take something that belongs to someone else without paying for it or without getting their permission. And it's just a part of our world. So if you are a thief, if you steal things, you are in some really bad company, biblically speaking. First of all, your brother in crime would be a guy named Judas. We are introduced to Judas and this particular character flaw of Judas in John chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. We often think Judas, guy who betrayed Jesus, yes, but there was more to his character than just betraying his friends. It says 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived in Bethany, where Lazarus lived. He's at his friend's house there, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took out a pint of pure nard, expensive perfume, poured it on Jesus' feet, wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Beautiful, beautiful scene of honoring Jesus. And Judas interrupts it here in verse 4. One of his disciples, though, Judas Iscariot, later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the proceeds given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. And John, I appreciate him for including this. He said, Judas didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he cared, but because he was a what? Thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So, that's Judas. Now, later on as he betrays Jesus, a lot of well-meaning Bible scholars have attempted to explain why would Judas have betrayed Jesus. Perhaps there's some very optimistic views that try to give us a reason why. Perhaps there are even some good intentions. Perhaps Judas didn't see himself as betraying Jesus as much as he was forcing a final confrontation between Jesus and the religious leaders. Jesus will have to pull out his power. Jesus will reveal who he really is. Jesus will come into his kingdom as the King of Kings. But there is a more simple explanation for why he sold Jesus off for 30 silver pieces, and I think it combines a little bit better with John chapter 12. He wanted the money. Judas liked the money. Any way he could get it, if it was dipping his hand in the ministry purse or if it was selling off his friend, he wanted money. So Judas was a thief. Jesus also calls Satan in John chapter 10, verse 10, a thief who comes to rob, who comes to steal. And that is exactly the contrast we need between God and Satan. Here is God, the Chesed, the love relationship he has with his people. He's giving, he's serving, he's building a beautiful future, he's blessing, he's protecting. Satan comes to ruin all of that. Whatever gift God has given you, we talked last week about the gift of our sexuality. It could be the gift of your job, the gift of your family, the gift of a friendship. Whatever good gift you have received from God, who's the gift giver, you better believe the taker is going to show up and try to take those gifts from you or destroy those gifts. So let's be clear about something before we go any further. It is that you can be a thief today and stop being a thief. You can transform your life. Just because you have always lived a certain way does not mean you have to continue to live that way. In fact, as Paul writes to these Christians in the city of Corinth, he tells them in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, some of you guys were thieves, and then you accepted the grace of the Lord Jesus, and your lives were changed. So that may be where you're at today. You may have lived your life one way up to this point, and today you're going to give your life to Jesus Christ and say, no more of that. No more of that. By His grace and the power of the Spirit in my life, I will be transformed. I will live a different type of life. Okay, the 8th commandment. It seems, thou shalt not steal. I mean, it seems as blunt, seems as clear as anything could possibly be. However, we, human beings, are incredibly creative at inventing new ways to break God's laws. So A, we can invent new ways to break it. B, we're also very creative about justifying. Look, that wasn't really stealing. I was going to give that back, or this or that. We have incredibly complex justifications to make us feel better about what we're doing and to say, no, we weren't really stealing in the first place. So let's talk this morning about some of the different types of stealing. First, there is, of course, the stealing of stuff, of objects, of things that do not belong to us, taking those for ourselves. The classic thing we think about when we think about a thief is kind of this first one, which just burglary, theft, shoplifting, those kinds of things. That's why we lock our cars. That's why we lock our homes. That's why stores have the video cameras and the little plastic tags on things to stop this kind of theft. Even with this, though, there are some inventive ways of stealing. And different cultures, I don't know how Africa is, but Brazil has its own different techniques of stealing. And I remember Isla and I, after a couple of years in Brazil, we bought a beautiful home, and we moved into this home, And one of the first things I was kind of puzzled over in this home, there are always things in a home that someone else has lived in that you're kind of like, I wonder what that's about. Well, we moved to this home, and the back wall, away from the street, there was all of this PVC piping that was really kind of, it wasn't very professionally done. It was just very kind of rigged up there. And it went from somewhere at the back wall up into this water cistern that we had. And I asked somebody about that, and they said, that's a gato. And I knew Portuguese a little bit at this point. I was like, a cat? A gato? And they said, no. A gato is also an illegal hookup, all right? So if you have a gato at your house, you can have a cable gato, get free cable. You can have an electricity gato. Our neighbors did that one time. They strung a wire up over the power cables out on the street and got free electricity. Our house had a gato for free water. So apparently the guys before us had not been paying their water bill because the meter is at the front of the house. The gato's at the back of the house, which of course we tore the gato out. Lots of gatos, but basically we just have a lot of ways that we've come up with taking things without paying for things, with taking what is not ours. Another kind of theft that might hit a little bit closer because perhaps you haven't burglarized a house, or stolen a car. How about workplace theft? Workplace theft. Studies tell us that there will be, in terms of the value of merchandise taken, over 5 times as much workplace theft this year than there will be shoplifting. So workplace theft is quite a problem. People take small things like pens and paper and paper clips and things like that, and people take big things like, boy, I could use that coffee pot at home, put that in the backpack, or I'll take this office chair home, or I'll take this iPad home and never give it back, or whatever. So workplace theft is quite a problem. Another kind of stealing, and one that has really taken off in the last few years and probably deserves a sermon unto its own, but we're not going to have time to do that in this series. But how about theft off of the internet? Yeah, theft off of the internet. You know, all of those free movies and free computer games and free software and free music. A lot of that stuff's not supposed to be free, actually. You're supposed to pay for that. Somebody produced that. Their livelihood depends on that. So write this one down. Internet theft. Movies, music, games, or just instead of games, just put software, downloads. I was at a church recently, and I spoke there, and at the end of the worship service, I noticed at the end of the worship service, the computer, the screens on the walls went black, except for one tiny little line at the bottom that said, "This is not an authorized copy of Windows." So they had some kind of stolen copy of Windows that they were using to run their worship service, which, I don't know, just felt a little weird. Now, the interesting thing is about this, exactly 77% of Christian teens who claim to be Christians, about 77% of those have admitted that they have downloaded something illegally in the past 6 months. Now, that's interesting. What's more interesting is that 90% of those believe they did nothing wrong. Okay? So, alas, we justify this kind of theft because I can sit in my bedroom or I can get on my iPad and I can do this. If I know which website to run or which hack to use, I can do this, and those folks will never miss it. They'll never even notice that I have taken their stuff. So a word to the 90% who think that is okay. That is not okay. Just because it's easy, just because you can do it, does not make it right. It's still stealing. When a designer spends time, or a group of designers spend time creating a piece of software or a game, when a musician, together with their producer in the studio, produce a song, produce an album, when a Hollywood studio produces a film that you want to watch, they are basing their livelihoods on that. They must sell that in order to continue to do business, to continue to pursue their craft. So what may seem to be free actually involves a real cost to those that you are taking from. So many different ways that we have come up with to steal. Some of them may seem better than others. Maybe the next one seems okay to you. How about underpaid taxes or unpaid taxes? Nobody likes paying the government, so why don't I find ways to underpay or not pay at all? That's stealing from the government. Or what about the next one? What about high interest loans? High interest loans. Actually, an article today in the Dallas Morning News about this and about how many faith groups are coming together to fight this in the state of Texas. In fact, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 20 actually forbids charging interest to the poor. These kinds of high interest loans, payday loans, or bring in your car title and we're giving, these are targeted toward people in financial distress. Right? If you have money, most of us here have enough money and a good enough financial situation. When we go and get a loan, we get a low interest loan. We get a good loan. The poor cannot do that. The poor don't have the credit ratings that we have, so they go down to these, on every kind of street corner, places that offer you cash right then, right there. Just give us your car title, sign that over as collateral, whatever, and we'll get you your loan. Those are exploiting the poor. In fact, I appreciate our city council in Dallas has taken action against this, and the chief of staff for the mayor, who's a member here at Preston Crest, has been involved in that as well as we try to fight this because it targets the poorest and the most vulnerable in our community. Those who can least afford to pay high interest rates are the ones that end up getting those sorts of loans and getting themselves into more and more and more trouble. I believe that equates to theft from the poor. You know, Robin Hood came to steal from the rich to give to the poor. These guys come along and steal from the poor to give to themselves, the rich. That is wrong. Now, obviously, another one that you've got to talk about in our climate today, a very corporate kind of climate in North Dallas, is embezzlement or mismanagement of funds. Just basically, if you're a CFO or a CEO or a bookkeeper or a county clerk or a politician, and you have been trusted with money to manage, diverting that money from the project or the people it is supposed to go to and diverting it toward your personal causes or your swimming pool remodel, that is stealing. False claims, filing false claims, the next one on the list. Does this happen? Filing false claims? Trying to bilk the insurance companies out of money? Let me ask you this. How many of y'all have had your roof replaced in the last few years? We had our roof replaced a few years ago. We got an introduction to this, a really quick introduction to this, as companies came by to give us estimates on repairing our roof. And the first two places that came by, they gave us this estimate and everything, and then they had this little side conversation. Okay, we're going to work this out so you don't have to pay anything. We're going to charge the insurance company more, so if you do business with us, and I'm like, wait a second, that's defrauding the insurance. Now, they may be the big bad insurance company, they may be the big rich insurance company, but I'm not going to steal from them. So finally, we had to actually work to find a company who would actually do it on the up and up. It was kind of surprising, really. And probably if you've had your roof redone, you have dealt with some of this as well. How about the next one, closely related to that, which is overbilling clients? Overbilling clients. Proverbs 11:1 speaks about this. The Lord abhors dishonest scales, but accurate weights are His delight. This is saying God does not want you to rig things so that you are overcharging your clients. I talked about this being incredibly relevant and incredibly tangible. Well, this week, Isla took our car, which needed some work done on the bumper. It's needed it for like 3 years. She took our car, our Honda Pilot, to this place that we trust, a very good place, done work on our cars before, to do this body work. She got an estimate from them, a $1,300 estimate. We were not going through the insurance company. We're going to pay this. It's going to come out of our wallets. So we take a car there. We get the estimate. I actually drop the car off, and it's there, and they're going to start working on it this past week. And I get into contact with them, and I say, hey, since we're not going through the insurance company or anything, is there any way I can get a little bit knocked off of this? I can get some kind of discount. She told us no. I've already given you the discount. And I said, well, okay, I just want you guys to know I will not spend over that estimate. I don't have that kind of money. I need you to stay within that estimate. She basically told me, you have no clue how this works, do you? And I got a lesson in how it works. She said, well, okay, but I've had 2 of our senior estimators take another look at your car, and they're telling me there's a 90% chance that there's more damage than we initially saw. I said, there's a 100% chance I'm coming to pick up my car right now before you touch it. So I took it to another place. But basically, what I learned is what we already know. That industry is based on overcharging. Now, generally, it's the big bad insurance company over there. And when you're filing on insurance, you just know I'm paying my deductible, my $500 or my $1,000, and the rest, I don't really care what the insurance company does. But when you're paying it out of your wallet, you really, really care. And you see how that is hardwired in when within 2 days, she's telling me that estimate you received, that detailed estimate that we signed off on, that's garbage. Doesn't mean anything. We're going to charge you a whole lot more than that. I was like, what? So overbilling clients, and we see that all the time. We experience that in the world that we live in. It drives us nuts. It's part of doing business. We don't have to do business that way, but you're going to run into this all of the time. Then you've got another one. James chapter 5, verse 4 talks about underpaying employees. How can I pay my employees less than we agreed to or less than they deserve? James chapter 5, verse 4 says, look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. So basically, you owe your workers money and you haven't paid them, but God knows you owe it. God knows you have stolen money out of your workers' hands, underpaying employees. And then this one's kind of more of a modern one. The final one here on stealing stuff is intellectual property. Plagiarism would be that. We traditionally think of plagiarism as being, you know, I got to write a history paper on Napoleon for my 8th grade class. I go and find one on the internet. I just slap my name on top of it and boom. Plagiarism or stealing intellectual property, that is certainly part of it, but it is a lot more than that as well. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here, but I bet some of you have experienced this one. At work, you had a great idea, all right? Maybe it was an idea of marketing some product or service that your company is involved in, or you had a great idea to save the company some money, or you had a great idea about X, Y, or Z. It doesn't really matter. You had a great idea. You turn around, and someone has convinced the boss that was their great idea. All of a sudden, you're hearing the boss, hey, John over here had this great idea for us to, and you're like, hey, that was my idea. I mean, stealing people's ideas is also stealing. So there are a lot of ways that we steal people's stuff. The next kind of category is one that's a little more nuanced. And number 2 on the outline this morning would be stealing time. The word that goes with this is laziness, stealing time. So basically, someone is paying me for my time, and I'm not really giving them my time. All right? I will receive the full check. I mean, I'm not going to send any of that check back, but I'm not really going to be giving the time that they're paying for. Where to start on this one, you know? Where to start on this one? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, the internet has invented huge industrial strength vacuums to suck away our time throughout the day. Ways for you to waste time at work. I mean, you can spend 45 minutes scouring YouTube for the cutest of the cute puppy videos, right? I mean, you devote yourself to a thorough search and investigation, and finally you arrive at the cutest cute puppy video, and then you can spend another hour making sure that you send that on to all of your friends so that they can also waste time at their jobs looking at the cute puppy video. Well, then there's all of the personal stuff that we do while we're at work, you know, planning the birthday party for little Johnny, planning the vacation, shopping, home shopping on, you know, via the internet while I'm at work and stuff like that. What about just socializing at work? Obviously, we need to be friendly at work, but do I need to spend 4 hours talking about the new Cowboys offensive coordinator at work? Perhaps that's stealing time from my boss. So stealing stuff and stealing time. Finally, I want to talk, and we'll close out this morning with this, just talking briefly about stealing from God. We can steal from God as well. And there's a couple of ways. One is stingy giving, and one is stingy living. Stingy giving. 10% is a historical, biblical baseline for giving to God with our money. 10% is a baseline for giving to God with our money. Listen to this. Malachi chapter 3. You've probably heard this before, but this is an actual case of God saying, "Whoa, you stole from me. You're trying to rob me." And it is about the tithe. God says, "Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me." You ask, "How do we rob you?" In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. God says people are robbing me. You are robbing me. There's a curse over you because you're not giving me your full tithe. You're not giving me 10% or more. You're giving me less. And yet you act like you're just fine. No, we're not robbing from you. Now, let's be clear about this. In a legal sense, the Hebrew people under the Mosaic Law were required to give 10%. Okay? They were obligated to give 10% to God, and we aren't in the same way. Okay? So tithing, I've got several points to make about this because I'm a big tither. I believe in it wholeheartedly. I believe it blesses people. I believe it is a starting point for generosity in giving to the local church. A couple of things about that. It is absolutely true. Tithing was an obligation in the Mosaic Law. It is also absolutely true that tithing as a principle existed long before it was ever put down on pen and paper, long before it was ever commanded. A guy named Abraham tithed. His grandson Jacob tithed. They said, and they didn't do it because they had to. There was nothing that said they had to do it. They just loved God, and they wanted to honor God. And they recognized that He was the source of 100% of what they had. And so giving back 10% was a way to say, "God, I honor you with my wealth." So before the law ever came to be, this is a principle that we see in Scripture. Now also, this I think to us weighs a lot more even than that. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have a notion of how much God has given you, of the kind of sacrifice God has made for you. Abraham did not have that notion. Moses didn't have that notion. They knew that God took care of them, that God was generous with them. They had no idea that God was going to give up His only begotten Son to be crucified for sinners. We know that. We understand that. So here's the deal with that. If 10% was expected for those who lived under the law and gave it as an obligation, then for those of us who have been set free by Jesus, 10% is at the very least a starting point for generosity. Less than 10% makes no sense at all. So here's how I think about tithing. God graciously gives me 100% of what I have. Amen? And then God says, you get to live on 90% of that. Enjoy that. I want you to honor me by giving 10% back, by recognizing that I am the source of all you have, and give 10% back to the local church. Look, when I pay my taxes, I pay because of the law. When I give my tithe, I do that because of my love, not because of the law. All right, our family, and I don't need to digress much more, but Isla and I have shared this before. We've been blessed since very early on in our marriage. We decided we were going to give at least 10% to the local church and then give to other things as they came along. And God has never ceased to take care of us as long as we have honored that commitment to Him. So stingy giving. Also, you can rob God through stingy living. It is refusing to use my God-given talents, treasure, and time to serve the needs of the church and the world. That is stingy living. Jesus told a parable about it in Matthew chapter 25. We'll kind of wrap up here this morning. I'm going to break this. I decided at first service going to break this sermon in two. So we're going to pick this back up next week. But I want to finish talking a little bit about Matthew chapter 25. Jesus tells a story. And in this story that you're probably familiar with, there's this very wealthy man in this story, and he is going to take a trip, going to be gone for a very long time, indefinite amount of time. He takes his talents, So that's a monetary unit, like talents of gold, talents of silver. Takes his talents and he distributes them amongst his employees, his servants. One of them he gives 5 talents of gold. Another one gets 2 talents. Another gets 1 talent. And you probably remember how this story goes. He goes off on this trip. One day, a long time in the future, he comes back. And he sits down and basically interviews each of his employees to see how they did with his stuff. It's his stuff, after all. One of them invested it, gave back the master way more than the master gave him. The other one with 2 talents put it in the bank, got some interest rate off that, gave that back to the master with interest. The third one, who only got 1 talent, remember, just buried it, just did absolutely nothing with it. Okay? The master was angry with that servant. Point being, Jesus is telling us, you have been given, you've been given money, you have been given talents and abilities, you have been given opportunities, you have been given networks of relationships, you have been given influence to use in influencing other people, and to take all of that, which is really God's stuff that He's given to you on loan, to take all of that stuff that God has given you and to bury it and do nothing with it, or to use it merely to serve yourself, that is stealing from God. That is taking the master's stuff and not using it according to the master's will. That is a strong point, but that is the point that Jesus is making with us. I'm going to pick this up next week right here because there's a couple more big ideas we need to talk about. But one thing I want to finish on this morning, Jesus encountered a lot of thieves, a lot of crooks, a lot of people like us. One of them, you may remember, Jesus encountered in his very last hours of life here on earth. As he's hanging on the cross, he is suspended between 2 thieves. He has a conversation with one of these thieves, and we have no indication that this guy was anything but a thief, all right? That's all we know about him, given what the Bible tells us. He was a thief. But as life is spilling away, Jesus is dying, this thief is dying, he turns to Jesus, and he sees something of God's grace and truth in Jesus, something. He believes, and he says, "Save me." Extend your grace. There's no argument, there's no justification, there's no, "This is why you should save me, Jesus." There's simply a throwing himself on the mercy of Jesus Christ, and Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." Don't you love the way Jesus treats sinners like us? He redeems us. He forgives us. He says, "Go and sin no more." He helps us change our lives. This morning, if you need to give your life to Jesus, put your faith in Him, be baptized into Jesus Christ. You can do that this morning. You have that opportunity. If you just need to get together with somebody and pray about something going on in your life, feel free to pray with somebody right next to you, your spouse or your family or your small group or your connection or just your neighbor sitting by you on the pew. Or if you have something you want to share with the church, come down and share that with me or one of our elders. And let's do this. Let's give our lives to God this morning. Rejoice in the grace that we've received. Seek His help in changing those parts of our lives that still need to be changed by His power. Let's stand together and worship and pray.